Previously on the Seventh Valkyrie, Borka the deliveryman makes a grave error, ignoring Kyrie Krona. Hungry for entertainment and unrestrained by seemingly any sense of morality, what does the Machine King have in store? Find out next on the Seventh Valkyrie. Krona cursed as he watched the deliveryman fall, marveling that such an obviously unintelligent man could be so infuriating. Krona did not often succumb to his emotions, and the fact that the results had been disappointing were even more frustrating. Borka's leg had been entirely cut off by a blade, and not just any blade, one fired by technology that would not exist anywhere in Etera for centuries. And yet, the deliveryman wasn't even screaming in a satisfying way. Lowering his arm, Krona made his way up to the struggling deliveryman, who seemed to have gone straight into shock and gasping desperation, which was an understandable response to the fact that he had lost his entire right leg below the knee. Walking up to Borka, who was just now starting to try crawling away, Krona examined the severed limb, and then sighed and tossed it towards the pond. Whichever slasher pike survived the fight would be hungry. I guess I'm not on my game tonight, Krona said, as he walked up to the stone platform that made up the porch. The deliveryman was crawling across the ground, but the limb and subsequent blood loss were going to kill him quickly if not attended to. Krona had time between now and then, though, and sat down on the porch, putting a hand on his knee and sighing. This is really... I don't know. It's been a few busy days, deliveryman, and to be honest, I was just sort of, looking for someone to bounce off of, someone to connect with. It gets exhausting a little bit, being the Machine King all the time. It's necessary for sure, keeping up that whole personality, but all of that thinking and planning and time manipulating can make you just a bit, crazy. Anyway, now look, I might have murdered you and raped you, or raped you and murdered you, or tortured you until you died, or I might have let you go, but you just had to be so fucking boring. Why were you so boring? Were you on drugs? Borka chose that moment to start screaming, but Krona sighed. Okay, I know you're trying, but the moment's gone. It's a little too late. This was the reaction to have had before I cut your leg off. Krona leaned down and grabbed the screaming deliveryman, this time with his metal arm. With a quick, careful clench of his fist, he crushed Borka's throat, turning the screams into a bit more of a gurgling, drowning wheeze. Krona sat the man back against the porch next to where Krona had been sitting, ignoring Borka's very weak efforts to fight him off. Too much blood loss. Then, Krona shifted his metal arm into a blade and pierced Borka's throat in one quick jab. Okay, if you can still hear me, hello? You're still responding a little bit. That'll keep you, that little hole in your throat, that'll keep you from drowning on your blood too quickly, Krona said, wiping Borka's blood on the stone as he sat next to the deliveryman, on the edge of the porch looking out across the garden. What? No response? Fuck, you seem to have gone fully into shock now. That was quick. Have you not been taking care of yourself? I think you might have been on drugs. Are you sure you weren't on... Forgot you can't listen to me anymore, or at least you can't respond. Krona eyed the man and then clicked his teeth. You're just disappointing from start to finish. You won't even be hanging around long enough to really listen, Krona said. And here I had all of this shit planned out for tonight. Okay, we can adjust. I have another use for you. Reaching to the man's face, Krona pressed a thumb into one of the man's eyes until it burst. That got a thrashing response out of Borka, and with a satisfied nod, Krona repeated, doing the same with Borka's other eye, pushing it until it burst. Then Borka stopped thrashing, so Krona realized he had to move quickly. He escalated to bursting both of Borka's eardrums, broke all of Borka's fingers individually, and finally reached in and snapped the man's jaw off, each time getting rewarded by the jolt of at least some response by the quickly dying man. But soon enough, all that was really left of Borka had bled out into the dirt, and even as Krona reached in and strategically manipulated the man's brain matter, it wasn't enough to get a response anymore. Standing up, Krona stripped off the man's pants, using the dry cloth remaining to help clean some of the blood from his hands. And then he tossed those two off to the side. "You had no wedding band," Krona said. You didn't even beg for your life, just had nothing of note to say. You weren't even listening to me, just ignoring me and then straight into shock when I cut off your leg. That was really all that you had to offer for your human existence?" Borka, of course, did not respond. Ugh. What a lame meatbag. Now what the fuck am I supposed to do with this evening? Krona took another look at the nearly unrecognizable body. Frowning, Krona reached down and touched himself a little bit. "A little rigor mortis?" he asked, but he found no response from his groin despite a little bit more vigorous rubbing. Man, woman, either way, it was never as satisfying with someone who'd already died. And Krona's moment was gone anyway. With a sigh, Krona finished stripping and chopping Borka down to pieces, and dragged the body and various parts over to the pond, where he tossed the man to the slasher pike. Another crunching red cloud erupted, and Krona estimated that when the slasher pike finished eating, there would be little left of Borka to discover. Snapping a light of fire from sparks between his fingers, Krona quickly burned the rest of Borka's clothes, and then sat by the fire next to the pond, giving a dramatic sigh as he lounged against the grass. And here I had a whole set of parallels and metaphors that I've been working on all day about the nature of predators and how the predators of Reen were going to tear each other apart and I would rule over the victor, and look at me, I'm talking to a fucking fish now. The slasher pike, like the deliveryman, also had no response, simply swimming around and retreating back to the deep water. Still, Krona could see it, and he watched it as it swam, eyes hungry on the surface. Well, it would be a shame to have thought and worked and edited a whole layman's explanation not to give it, so I will give it to you, Slasher Pike, Krona said. You see, here's what's going on. Give me a moment while I return to my machine kingly self. Okay. You see, the news of my work throughout the continent has finally reached the Eterans, just as I launched two other pieces of my plan. The prison break and the carousel, of course. You see, right here, Fish, I would have explained to that delivery man what I did around Edera and all the details, and then they would have been horrified. It would have been delight. And I would have been smug and uninterested, and that's always a fun dynamic. We probably could have bounced off of that for 5 to 10 minutes at least. The slasher pike seemed unimpressed, so Krona moved on. Anyway, now the Eterans have launched their river blockade, and they're bringing the bridge into play, which will only ratchet tensions up higher and higher. This, as you know, Fish, is the perfect opportunity for me. You see, the families can move high-value product whenever and wherever they want if they put their minds to it. To them, the blockade is just an inconvenience, a few more percentage points on their year-end numbers. But a big part of the deliveries that come through the legitimate channels is food and supplies, which hits the people of the old city the hardest. This is what's going to keep things growing and growing and growing. Now, in a normal situation, the old city has stores to last years, and it's impossible to block ocean-bound vessels without taking the old city. A tall task for sure. And the Old city people grow enough in the mountains and the forests that they could keep the city supplied for years, and they did during the war, after all. But when you have the families at each other's throats about how to respond to the Edoran threat, not to mention the Machine King looming over all of this, which is me, by the way, all of a sudden that unified strategy, all those complicated logistics of bringing and feeding and housing and supporting the entire old city, well, it becomes a little bit more complicated and a lot harder to execute. A lot of people, especially those who are poor and rely on the assistance of the families for work and support, they will get it hard. The slasher pike finished eating a chunk of deliveryman and began to move on to another. Now, why are the families divided on how to respond? Well, I'll tell you. Deliveryman/fish/whoever the fuck wants to listen to this goddamn thing I took all this time writing? Damn it, where was I? Why are the families divided on how to respond? Well, there's more to the Edoran threat than just the blockade. With those barges came thousands of men, enough to get the families' hackles up. Not enough to be a danger, and my reports from Mandus-based informants don't show signs of more reinforcements coming just yet. But another few days of barges could easily change that, especially with bridge construction underway. And why is Edera so up in arms? Well, why more than usual? The slasher pike bit through a particularly juicy chunk of Borka. Exactly. It's all thanks to my attacks, of course. Edera is scared and on edge, and when Edera is on edge, they are dangerous and stupid. Several watercraft were set aflame on the old city docks last night, but they were fires started by hand, not by gifts. The families will notice that. It's nothing too out of the ordinary on a normal night, but in these times and in the aftermath of massive attacks on Edera, well, let's just say there were quite a few ideas being thrown about on how to respond. And the fires were me, by the way. Back to the four families and how they cannot seem to agree. The three flames seem to want war with everyone. Me, Edera, the concept of wind itself, though I do know that their leaders are smarter than that, and at times they lean into the perception of Firelanders as being hotheads and violent to conceal their larger goals. Now, admittedly, Firelanders are hot-headed and violent, which is what makes their bluffs work when they choose to use them. On the other hand, the Ravens of Dusk are the opposite of the Flames, advising that people continue operations as usual, with an elevated sense of risk, obviously, waiting until someone makes a move. Now, no one trusts the Ravens, least of all the three families, because all of them suspect that the Ravens are my source of information. But at the same time, the Ravens have consistently warred with me everywhere outside of the old city. Oh, they've been such a fun competition to engage with. It would be a strange bedfellow to choose that enemy over the loyalty of the Erasmus Pact, don't you think? Oh, what's that? Krona said, talking to the slasher pike. You want to know who and how I'm doing what I'm doing here? You want to know about my friends, who I'm working with, who I'm tapping into? Well, that, my friend, will be a trade secret and far too complicated to get into right now. But what I will say, to finish setting the stage, is that both the Golden Serpent and the Seekers of Dawn desire something in the middle. They want decisive response to my little machinations, and to the Eterans as well, but they also want to stay vigilant and guard themselves, not overextend. A wide array. A wide spectrum of responses. And to the layman, these four families might seem scattered. But those sly foxes and serpents and ravens and dragons are far smarter than that. You understand, don't you, delivery man? You're fucking dead. There is a reason it has taken me so long to get a foothold in the old city. And I will admit, my power is still, shall we say, tenuous here. Are the four families embroiled in conflict as a ploy to lure me in? Now that I've shown my hand, they may think this is the ideal time to strike at me. They will love to kill me, remove the thorn in their side that has slowed their expansion across Edera, but they would also love to use me against the Ederans. I only killed Ederan soldiers, not the people of the old city, and they'll know that I could be a powerful ally. That is, if I want to be. And so the curtain rises, with the Machine King at center stage, everyone waiting, anticipating exactly what I'll do next. Krona finished with a flourish, but the pike had made its way to the other side of the pond, and Krona sighed again. Fish were good listeners, better than Borka had been at least, but bad conversationalists it seemed. Again, as he'd learned today, sometimes even a fish was better than human company. But not always. Krona looked to the pools of blood that still stained the back porch and the earth around it. Humans were incredibly frustrating at times, and some of them were a total waste of space, in Krona's opinion. But for every 10 piles of bones and blood flapping their meat around, there were some humans that were deliciously entertaining. Krona stood up, stretching his legs and returning to the comfort of the sparse, bare rooms where he had temporarily made his home. Speaking of things that are delicious, he smiled. He sat back and began to compose something in his head. It was a letter, a message, a piece of poetry, as it were, to someone who is a true mystery sometimes. Fierce, independent, yet afraid and loyal. Chaotic, but dependable. Powerful and yet needing guidance and protection. He loved that about her. In fact, her very contradictions were the thing he loved most about that dark-haired girl. And his letter would have to handle that appropriately. Want to know what happens next? Join us on Patreon to become a hero of Edera and get early access to episodes along with bonus features, director's commentary, and the full Tab to Archive. You can also find other ways to support us at the links in the description, and we will see you next week.